May 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered, but U-boats were still at sea. They surfaced in Europe's quiet harbors, their war finally over. But what happened next was unprecedented. Hundreds of U-boats were captured, studied, and destroyed. This is their untold story after World War II. On May 8, 1945, Germany signed its unconditional surrender. Within hours, Admiral Karl Donitz, Hitler's successor and former U-boat commander, issued a historic order. All U-boats were ordered to cease operations, surface, and surrender to the nearest Allied authority. The long war beneath the Atlantic was finally over. Across the North Atlantic, Bay of Biscay, and Norwegian fjords, over 150 U-boats surfaced. Their exhausted crews hoisted white flags as Allied aircraft circled overhead. They sailed towards ports like Loch Erebol in Scotland, Lisheley in Northern Ireland, and Portland in southern England. Each arrival marked the quiet collapse of the Wolfpack fleet that once haunted Allied shipping lanes. The surrender process was tightly controlled by the Allies. Allied warships escorted the submarines directly into port, where Royal Navy and U.S. Navy boarding parties seized codes, charts, and weapons. Engineers then catalogued these rusted, battle-scarred vessels, many of which were barely seaworthy after months underwater. At Loch Erebol, nearly 40 U-boats anchored together in a grim parade of defeat. The logistics were immense, involving towing and securing submarines from across occupied Europe. A few never made it, scuttled or lost due to mechanical failure before reaching port. In the following weeks, Allied leaders faced a pressing question: what should be done with the world's most advanced submarine fleet? The United States and Britain saw immense intelligence value in the revolutionary Type 21 and 23 designs, while the Soviet Union, entering the early Cold War, demanded its share of the captured technology. Meanwhile, the captured German U-boat crews endured long months of captivity. Some were interrogated for valuable intelligence, especially engineers familiar with the new propulsion systems or torpedo technology. Others languished in camps, uncertain of their ultimate fates. By late 1945, most were repatriated to a defeated and divided Germany. By the year's end, harbors from Trondheim to Portsmouth were clogged with captured submarines. What came next, Operation Deadlight, would ensure most of these machines never sailed again. By autumn 1945, the Allies had gathered over 100 surrendered U-boats in British harbors. Keeping them afloat was costly, and storing them indefinitely proved impossible. The Royal Navy therefore approved Operation Deadlight, a plan to tow captured submarines into the Atlantic and sink them. Between November 1945 and February 1946, this quiet operation would erase most of the Kriegsmarine undersea fleet. The logistics were daunting. In total, 156 U-boats had surrendered to the Allies. 116 of these were designated for destruction under Deadlight by the Royal Navy, which divided the operation into three dumping areas, XXYY and ZZ, roughly 100 to 120 nautical miles northwest of Ireland. There, the submarines would be sunk by naval gunfire, explosive charges, or by simply opening their sea valves. The first phase of Deadlight began in November 1945, when Royal Navy tugs started towing groups of submarines from Scottish and Irish ports. But many of the U-boats were actually in dreadful condition. Some had been at sea for months, lacking proper maintenance. Others were battered by Allied bombing or even deliberate sabotage. Their ballast tanks leaked and their engines often seized, and their hulls were significantly weakened by rust. In stormy winter seas, towing these unstable wrecks was a hazardous task. As a result, over a third of the U-boats never made it to the scuttling zones. 56 vessels foundered or sank on the way, dragged down by rough weather or structural failure. The Royal Navy recorded each loss but made little effort to recover them. Deadlight's sole purpose was destruction, not preservation. Once in position, destroyers and frigates quickly finished the job. Crews sometimes used aerial rockets or naval gunfire to ensure the U-boats went under quickly. Among the doomed submarines was U-2336, the last U-boat to sink Allied ships during the war. It surrendered at Lichely in June 1945 and was deliberately sunk off island in January 1946. Another, U-295, met the same fate on December 17, 1945, after being towed from Loch Ryan. However, not all U-boats were destroyed. The most advanced examples, the Type 21 and Type 23 boats, were spared for study. These represented the future of submarine design, featuring streamlined hulls and improved underwater endurance. British and American engineers examined several closely, reverse engineering their technologies for their own post-war fleets. U-2511, Germany's only fully operational Type 21 at war's end, was scuttled last on February 7, 1946. For decades, Deadlight wrecks lay forgotten on the seabed. Then, between 2001 and 2003, maritime archaeologist Innes McCartney led expeditions that rediscovered many of them. Using sonar and deep-sea photography, his team identified at least 14 intact U-boat hulls, preserved in the cold Atlantic mud. These findings revealed how hastily the scuttlings had been carried out. Many boats sank upright, their decks still armed, and their steel now encrusted with coral and history. Operation Deadlight had served its purpose, to erase the physical presence of Hitler's U-boat fleet. Yet, its aftermath left an unintended legacy, a vast underwater graveyard, stretching across the North Atlantic, a silent testimony to the end of Germany's submarine war. While most German U-boats met their end in the North Atlantic, a select few survived. To the Allies, these submarines were more than just wartime relics. They were technological blueprints that could redefine undersea warfare. Between 1945 and 1948, dozens of captured U-boats were retained, repaired, or distributed among the victorious powers, becoming critical test subjects in the dawn of the Cold War. To manage this process, the Tripartite Naval Commission, formed in August 1945, allocated the surrendered fleet between the United States, United Kingdom, and Soviet Union. Each received 10 U-boats for examination, prioritizing the advanced Type 21 and 23 designs. Their streamlined hulls, greater battery capacity, and snorkel systems represented a revolutionary step. These were submarines designed to fight primarily beneath the surface, rather than above it. In Britain, the Royal Navy integrated several of these vessels for extensive testing. U-3017, renamed HMSN-41, underwent submerged trials and endurance runs before being scrapped in 1949. Others, such as U-190, surrendered off Newfoundland and were taken into Canadian service as training platforms for sonar and torpedo practice. The Royal Navy also captured U-boat hulls to refine depth charge tactics, detonating explosives near real German steel rather than just mock targets. The United States took a very similar interest. Captured submarines were studied extensively at naval facilities in Portsmouth and New London. Crews of the U.S. submarine force examined propulsion systems, silent running technology, and periscope design. These features would later influence America's post-war submarine classes. Particularly significant was U-234, a long-range cargo submarine captured on May 14, 1945, while en route to Japan with a secret payload that included uranium oxide and jet engine components. U.S. Navy engineers studied its construction and cargo before sinking it during weapons tests in 1947. Across Europe, other Allied navies received their share. The Soviet Union acquired several of the prized Type 21 boats, which served as direct templates architecture and snorkel systems that gave their new fleet a sudden technological leap. To Western nations, this was a rather worrying development. The same German engineering that once hunted Allied convoys was now fueling an arms race, beneath the cold Arctic ice. Other nations also benefited. France, rebuilding its navy after years of occupation, took over some boats from Allied stockpiles. One of these vessels, U-123, then served for several years under a new flag before being decommissioned. Norway operated others for training and coastal patrol, while Denmark utilized German submarine technology within its post-war shipbuilding programs. Yet, not every transfer was purely scientific. The redistribution of U-boats became an early symbol of post-war geopolitics. The United States hoped that sharing German technology would maintain balance among the Allies. But as the Soviet Union expanded its fleet, cooperation quickly turned into competition. The U-boats had changed owners, but their strategic value remained. By the end of the decade, most of the retained submarines had served their purpose, deliberately sunk or dismantled. Still, their influence proved lasting. The innovations of the Type 21, its batteries, hydrodynamics, and underwater speed, became the design foundation for nearly every conventional submarine built through the 1950s. In a sense, Germany's final wartime invention became the blueprint for the nuclear age. While hundreds of U-boats were scuttled or scrapped, a handful escaped destruction and entered a new chapter. These survivors, scattered across Europe and North America, transformed from weapons of war into artifacts of remembrance. Among the best known is U-995, a submarine that surrendered in May 1945 at Trondheim, Norway. It later served briefly in the Norwegian Navy before being returned to Germany in 1965. Today it rests at Le Beau, near Kiel, preserved as a museum ship beside the Marine Ehrenmal Memorial. Those who step inside its narrow hull experience the oppressive quarters where 45 men once lived, worked and fought for weeks at a time. In France, several captured U-boats were also used in the post-war Navy. The U-123, renamed Blizon, became one of the few to see regular peacetime service. When retired, it was preserved in Lorient, once one of the Kriegsmarine's main U-boat bases. Other survivors lie in more unusual circumstances. U-534, raised from the Kattegat Strait in 1993, is now displayed in Birkenhead, England, its hull cut into sections to reveal the claustrophobic interior.